Hey everybody, this is Sam. You're about to listen to episode 116 of Wheel Bearings, which Rebecca and I recorded on the rooftop of the One Hotel Brooklyn Bridge this past weekend. At the end of our conversation, make sure you keep listening because I've added on the recording of a roundtable session that Rebecca participated in on Saturday afternoon with Alan McNish. Alan is a three-time Le Mans 24-hour winner and is currently running the Audi Sport ABT Schaeffler Formula E team. And he gives some great insights into the strategy for the drivers and teams in Formula E. So enjoy the show. All right, welcome to episode 116 of Wheel Bearings. I'm Sam Abul-Samad from Navigant Research.
And I'm Rebecca Linland from RebeccaDrives.com.
And Rebecca, we are sitting here across from each other today on a nice, beautiful early morning in Brooklyn, right next to the East River, overlooking Manhattan. And back behind us here is the site of the 2019 New York E-Prix, the Formula E race, which is the grand finale of the 2018-2019 season. We'll get to that in a few minutes. But first, before we do that, what have you been driving?
So this week I had the 2019 Toyota 4Runner, and I actually had the TRD Off-Road Pro spec, like totally tricked out from a visual standpoint. It had all the features that you would possibly want in an off-road vehicle. It had roof rack, it had big fat tires on it.
Off-road tires.
Off-road tires. And, it looked fantastic. It was really, really cool. And I actually had to drive it about 3 hours north to Boston for the July 4th celebrations. And then I drove it back the next day. And I was really pleasantly surprised at how comfortable it was. Because it was a lot of driving. It ended up to be just over 500 miles. And
it's a long way to go in a vehicle of that type.
Well, exactly. And, it was a really stripped down, bare bones version. It didn't even have auto AC. It didn't have any of the new systems, safety systems. No blind spot monitoring. It had a screen that was just only slightly larger than my actual phone. And, so it was kind of cool to have this back to basics vehicle, but to have it really perform really, really well on the road and actually be comfortable to drive. It also swallowed up 2 gigantic upholstered chairs with no problem, which was great. And, it was a little high. Honestly, it was rather high for me to get into. As people know, I'm only 5 feet tall. So from that standpoint, it probably wouldn't be an ideal vehicle for people on the shorter side.
Did it have running boards?
It did not have running boards. Okay. And, I kind of had to hoist myself up via the steering wheel. And then kind of, leak down just a bit. So, but, I unfortunately didn't get a chance to take it off-road because it is incredibly capable. It had, the low gear range and such. This one had the 4.0 liter displacement and a V6 engine. I believe I got about 18 miles per gallon, which...
That's not a terrible number given the nature of this type of vehicle, because things like those off-road tires,
yes,
they're not exactly low rolling resistance.
Exactly.
Those put a lot of extra drag on the vehicle. Plus, being up high,
they do, right? Exactly. So you don't have great aero. I mean, I think that it was, from an off-road capability standpoint, it's probably fantastic. I was just very pleasantly surprised at how well it performed in that kind of in a function that it's not totally designed for.
Yeah. So it still makes a decent daily driver.
Absolutely. And with all that off-road capability, it definitely got a lot of looks. There were people that would stop, turn around, definitely want to check it out, and they were surprised that it was the 4Runner because it looks really different and much beefier looking than others. It had cool matte black accents to it, and just overall, the seats were pretty easy to put down. The functionality of it was incredible. Again, this one was very bare bones. My issue with the fact that it was very bare bones, but it was $46,000.
You're paying for that off-road capability.
Well, I mean, it's like at least give me auto HVAC. I'm trying to adjust everything
Do
on the
they
fly.
offer auto climate control on other trims of the?
Yes.
The 4Runner?
So. Oh, yes, for sure. Yeah,
Okay.
I believe so. I mean, I think that
I seem to recall the last time I drove one, it had that.
Yeah, there's others, like typical Toyota, they offer a bunch of different trims on this. And so you can kind of customize it to the way that you want. This just happened to be the one that I had as the media car. So I think that it's something that people, there's 7 different models of it. I think that people can find exactly what they want. The TRD Pro starts at $46,815. I want to say that mine ended up at about 48 and change, somewhere in there. But again, I unfortunately didn't get to do things like the Hill Start Assist Control. I didn't get to experience the locking differential, things like that, that are fantastic for that type of capability.
You didn't use the low 4-wheel drive low range for navigating Boston potholes?
Unfortunately, I did not.
Well, one thing I'm curious about, I mean, a lot of times, these off-road tuned vehicles like the TRD Pro and Wrangler Rubicon, things like that. The ride quality often suffers when you're driving, especially on less than ideal roads.
Right.
How was the?
And that's what was. I mean, it was definitely stiff. I was just out of town. I didn't take it into Manhattan either, which I do sometimes with some of these vehicles. But overall, I was just really impressed with the ride quality on it. Because
that certainly makes it more useful as a daily driver in addition to being.
And that was the thing, is that I wouldn't hesitate to use this as a daily driver. I think, when you think about others like the Wrangler and how the previous Wrangler was not something that you would really want to drive all the time.
Was not great,
right?
For that.
The current one is
JL's
fabulous.
Good, yeah.
So, I think that from a daily driver standpoint, this would be a good vehicle for people that maybe have an aging Xterra or an FJ, something like that. I wouldn't hesitate to recommend that they replace it with this vehicle. It's just that you do have to get used to, the fact that it may not have everything that you want unless you build it like that. Yeah. So, and obviously when I talk about the safety features, I'm talking more about the advanced safety features than anything. So I was just glancing to see if this even had, that ability to add some of these things. And this particular one really focuses on off-road.
Yeah, and I think the 4Runner is one of the older vehicles in Toyota's lineup in terms of the current generation. It's been around for several years now, and I would guess that we're probably, while Toyota's been making a lot of emphasis on, adding driver assistance features to all their mainstream products as a standard feature. If it's not on the 4Runner, it's probably because it's close enough to the current model is probably close enough to the end of its life cycle that it's better to wait to rather than try to engineer that stuff into this current one. They're probably incorporating it into the new one, which is probably a year or two away.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, I could see this because even off road, this is the thing, is that you maybe you don't use those features off road, but you certainly want it to be used. When you're on the road,
right.
and when you're and
the reality is that's the way most people are going to buy this thing, are going to be using it on the road most of the time.
Exactly, most of the time you're going to be using this thing. Now they do have what's called the TRD Off-Road Premium. That one starts at $40,000, so it doesn't have some of the cosmetic features of it, but you can probably get that a little bit more dolled up. So it's something that you can build on the site and see which ones fit your needs and your family style.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
It sounds like another interesting option in that more traditional SUV segment, as opposed to crossovers, which is
exactly.
Where most of the market's going, is in the car based crossovers. And this is more of a classic SUV. It's body on frame,
right? And that's one of the things that I did like about it and appreciated it. It's definitely a truck, but that's okay. That's what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
And it trucks really well.
and then if that's what you want, you have options.
Well, exactly. And as you say, like, it's so many vehicles these days have kind of been softened and cushied and made to sort of.
People want the look of something that can go off road, but they don't. They know they're never going to use it that way, and so they don't care.
But this is definitely something that could go off-road, probably very, very capable. I'd love to take it off-road sometime and see what it can do, because now, as I said, I mean, I think I put a total of probably 800 miles on that vehicle this
That's
week.
a lot of miles to put on a vehicle like that.
It's a lot of miles, and again,
especially a long highway trip.
Right. And then I drove it down. I think I'm losing track of my days now, but I think I drove it down to drop it off at LaGuardia when I left on another trip, and again, it just performed really, really well, even in that circumstance. Changed lanes easily. It had, it was it was much more dynamic to drive than it looks.
Yeah.
And so while they focused on the off-road capabilities, it didn't lose a lot in the driving dynamics, especially for what it is. It's not a race car, and that's not what it was bought for. It does have a fairly high profile, but again, it still had the driving enjoyment.
Yeah.
That I wasn't necessarily expecting.
Right.
And, with my drive up to Boston in north of Hartford, there's these big, huge hills that, you go all the way up and you come all the way down, you go back up again. And all through there, that engine really, the V6 engine really, really held up well.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, if you can put 800 miles on a vehicle like that and not come away totally annoyed at it, then they've succeeded.
Right.
I think that demonstrates that it's a really reasonably practical vehicle.
Right. And I got better acquainted with AM/FM radio again.
There you go. What more could you ask for?
Exactly.
All right. Well, I spent the most recent week with the 2019 Nissan Leaf Plus, which debuted at CES this year.
Yes.
So this is the newest variant of the Leaf, longer range. It's up to 62 kilowatt hour battery pack. The second generation Leaf, when they introduced it a couple years ago, had a 40 kilowatt hour pack. So now the Leaf is finally up over 200 miles of range. Official EPA rating is 226. Most mornings when I got up and unplugged it, it was sitting. The range estimate was somewhere around 220, 221.
And how did you charge it?
I just charged it. I don't have a 240 volt charger at home,
right?
So I just had it plugged into my home
outlet.
Yeah, to 110 outlet.
Okay.
The first day, it came with it was about 70% charge, and I didn't really go anywhere that afternoon. I left it plugged in overnight, and that got it pretty much topped up.
That's pretty good, though.
And I spent the first couple of days driving mostly around town locally, but did have to take a couple of longer trips. I had some meetings I had to go to. One day, drove it from my home near Ann Arbor to Auburn Hills for a client meeting, and it was about a roughly 110 mile round trip. And that week, the week I had it it got particularly hot. It was up temperatures in southeast Michigan were 90, 91, 92 degrees, and very high humidity, which meant that I wanted to have the air conditioning on. One of the things I took advantage of, which something that most EVs have now, is the ability to precondition the cabin. So you can set a timer, you can tell it when you want to leave and what temperature you want, and while the car's still plugged in, it will figure out how long it's going to take to get to that temperature. It'll turn on the air conditioning, or in the wintertime, same thing with heating. It'll turn on the climate control in advance of when you want to leave and get the temperature down to that level while you're still plugged in. So there's less load on the battery, because it takes a lot less load to maintain a temperature than it does to, crank it up or down 20 degrees.
Right.
And so that it doesn't cut your range nearly as much. So I had the cabin temperature set to 69 degrees, when I had to leave for my meeting, and got in the car. It was already over 80 degrees outside. Got in the car, it was nice and comfortable inside, and and then I just left it there and maintained the temperature really nicely. So about 110 mile round trip. I think it took about 130 or so miles off the range. Okay. So it was down. By the time I got back, it was somewhere around just under 90 miles, about 88, 87 miles, something like that. So it worked really well, and I think it really demonstrated again to me that as it did earlier this year when I had the Kona EV in the middle of February, when we had a real cold snap, that that 200 mile threshold for an electric vehicle is really kind of the sweet spot, I think, for most people, because if you live in California where the weather is always fairly temperate, a lot of times, you can get away with a car that does 120, 130 miles of nominal range. But when you start to get into the more extreme conditions, very hot or very cold, and you have to use the climate control to be practical, that takes a lot out of a battery. And, having that extra margin in there, 220, 230, 240 miles, you still easily have, 140, 100 to 160 miles, even if you haven't preconditioned it. And so I think, it makes it useful for just about anybody, for just about any trip short of a cross-country road trip.
Right.
And for that, increasingly, you've got networks like Electrifying America that are putting out, DC fast charging networks all across the country. So if you've got, 200 plus miles of range, you can drive for several hours, stop, have lunch, charge the car back up again, and be on your way again. One issue with the Leaf is Nissan is still opting to use the CHAdeMO charging. The Leaf Plus version does bump up the maximum charge rate from 50 kilowatts to 75 kilowatts. So that's a little faster than before. So you can still fill up the battery in about the same time as the 40 kilowatt hour Leaf would do, even though you're putting more charge into it. In fact, it might even be slightly faster. But aside from that, it's a very good car. It drives well. The kind of the one functional issue I would complain about with the Leaf, and this also applies to several other Nissan vehicles, and as I talked about last time with Dan, it also applies to a lot of other brands like Range Rover, is the displays that these companies choose to use for their center displays. These glossy displays, you get a lot of fingerprints on there. If you're gonna force me to touch the screen, use something that is not going to show up fingerprints, especially when the sun is shining in from the side, through the side window of the car, And then in Nissan's case, it's particularly egregious because the quality of the screens they use in a lot of their cars is very poor. It's kind of dim and low contrast. It does not look good. In a lot of conditions, it's hard to see. At least, unlike Toyota's, it doesn't do the rainbow effect when you're wearing my polarized sunglasses.
Right.
But it's still kind of a dim, dull display, so it just doesn't look good. It's also not the most responsive screen. Sometimes you have to touch it a couple of times to get it to react, which is also a real pain.
Right.
And again, you've heard me complain about touchscreens in general. If you got to use a touchscreen, at least make it responsive and fast. Don't make me keep looking at the screen and trying to hit that touch target multiple times to get an effect.
Well, especially in a vehicle like the Leaf, which is designed to appeal to early adopters. Right. I mean, you're supposed to feel like you're driving.
Well, really,
the
Leaf is the second generation Leaf, especially, is targeted more. They've moved away from the early adopters because the first one was kind of weird looking. Yes, but it still is people. When I talk about, I'm not talking about innovators. Right. I'm like talking about kind of like the second step on that adoption curve. These are people that want to have this kind of technology. I mean, they're willing to buy an electric vehicle, which is still a very, very small portion of the market, and they want their technology to feel like they're driving the future, right? Right.
And that's the thing, is that you want to be in a cabin that seamlessly works with all of your technology.
Yeah, and if you're trying to appeal to somebody who uses a high-end smartphone,
right?
Make that touchscreen work as well as a typical high-end smartphone,
exactly,
and look as good.
Right. And so even if you're working with people that as you say, you're trying to get it more mainstream. Even the most mainstream person wants their technology to integrate seamlessly with their vehiel these days.
Yeah,
absolutely. That's a criteria.
And Nissan does support Android Auto and Apple CarPlay,
right.
Like the brand T.
Well, yes. And the thing too is that when you're driving that vehicle, as you say, like you want that touchscreen has to work. It has to be something that functions at the highest level in my mind. Like that's not the place to compromise.
Right.
On that direct. I mean, it's human machine interface, HMI.
Yeah. No. That's absolutely true.
And those are the places that get buyers really frustrated and have a very negative impact on ratings, on your feelings towards that vehicle, on your connection, no pun intended, but on that connection to that vehicle. If you have a situation, it almost doesn't matter how well the vehicle functions if you're constantly fighting with that HMI.
It's the perception of it.
It is.
And I mean, it really is. It is a functional thing too.
Right. It is. And a safety thing too. Because then you're suddenly looking at that screen constantly, as opposed to knowing that when you touch it, it's going to do what you expect it to do.
You tap it once and you're going to get the response you expected.
Right.
Yeah. And other technology areas of the car actually do work really well. This Leaf was equipped with the Pro Pilot Assist package, which is a single lane level 2 partially automated system, driver assist system.
Right.
So it does lane following, lane tracking, rather than just trying to keep you out of the lane. It's actually trying to center you in the lane. It is a hands-on system.
Right.
Version 2 of Pro Pilot that is launching in Japan this fall and coming here hopefully early next year, is actually a more advanced system that is a hands-off system like GM Super Cruise.
Okay.
And that has a driver monitor system. The current version that's on the Leaf and other Nissan vehicles in the U.S., it does not have that yet. So it's a hands-on system, but it works reasonably well. It did occasionally struggle to recognize some lanes, but overall it worked pretty well. And with the adaptive cruise control, which was handy as I was driving up I-75 on the north side of Detroit, which is currently in the process of being reconstructed, and so there's a lot of construction, some backups there, and so that was actually a very handy feature to have in those zones. So it maintained a safe distance to the car ahead. Even if we were slowing down, speeding up all the time, and the e-pedal system that the Nissan has for heavy regen, doing 1 foot driving. So you for the most part, aside from panic stops, you don't really ever have to touch the brake pedal. You can just lift off, just modulate the accelerator pedal, lift off, and it will bring the car to a complete stop if you take your foot all the way off the accelerator.
Right. So strictly one pedal driving, then you can really get away with.
Which is great for city urban city
Yeah, no,
driving.
that's cool for sure.
So I thought overall I liked it. The Leaf Plus that I had, was pretty much loaded with just about every option that Nissan offers on it. So it was about $44,000.
Wow.
But it's still eligible for the full $7,500 federal tax credit, so that gets you down to $37,000, which is still kind of pricey for a compact.
Right.
When you can buy a Honda Civic or a Nissan Sentra, for low $20,000 range, it's hard. It's still kind of hard to justify that cost from an economic perspective. Certainly from an environmental perspective, you do have the advantage of a zero emissions vehicle, but from pure economics, if you're looking at your total cost of ownership, that's still going to be a challenge.
Right.
And they need to do that. Fortunately, Nissan, does offer the base Leaf S. It starts at $29,000 before the tax incentives. So now you're down, $22,000. For the Leaf S, $22,500. Now you're in the same price range. Of course, it's not as well equipped as a $22,000 Civic or Sentra, but if you want to drive an EV and you want something that's really affordable, you can get 150 mile range Leaf, for $22,000 still. So I think Nissan is trying to really appeal to a more mainstream audience. Move beyond the early adopters. To more mainstream customers with the Leaf now, with what's still a very practical Leaf, even at 150 miles.
Right. So. I can't remember exactly how much they have, what volume they have left on their federal tax, the full federal tax
credit. The last time I checked, I think they were at about 140 and 150,000 sales. So, they're probably still through the remainder of 2019 and. Maybe I'm guessing that they will probably hit the 200,000 threshold probably in the first quarter of 2020. Somewhere around there.
And keep in mind that it doesn't just stop; it goes through that quarter and then it starts grading downward.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you still have some time to get the full $7,500 tax credit if you're in California and some other states. There's also additional state incentives.
Right, and it's always worth checking that out because they do. A lot of times, the states will run specials or they'll have a time-sensitive opportunity, almost like an incentive to be able to do that.
And the other option is leasing, too. A lot of manufacturers offer really good lease deals on EVs. So if you're not sure, you know,
Yeah.
Get a 2 or 3 year lease, and you can get some of those leases for, $300 a month or less sometimes.
Exactly. I mean, some of the leases are unbelievably good. So yeah, so it's good to check it out. And as you said, for the range is something that really most people can go a couple of days in a daily driving situation without having to charge. You don't have to charge
Absolutely.
every single night. And
which is also very helpful if you happen to live in an apartment or something where you may not have access to charging.
Yep, exactly.
You can stop at a DC fast charging station somewhere, or even a level 2 charging station when you go shopping. A lot of places, a lot of stores, retailers have those. Or if you have workplace charging, that's also another option.
I've been petitioning for years to try and encourage people that, like here in Manhattan, in the metropolitan area, where hundreds of thousands of people take the train in from Connecticut, Long Island, New Jersey. They live in the suburbs, and they drive from their McMansion to the train station. And
every one of those parking lots should have a row of chargers.
You don't even need chargers, though, because you can drive. Most of the time, you have to have a residency sticker to park at that train station, or you can get it like somewhere close by.
That's true. Yeah, if you're living in the burbs, you probably have single family residence.
Right, and so you can drive to and from your train station really, and every day, and maybe at most you're looking at 100 to 150 miles in all 5 days.
That's true. Yeah.
So then on the weekends, you charge at home.
Yeah.
And, and that's the thing, is that you have an opportunity to use these vehicles. You don't even need to have significant infrastructure at those train stations.
Yeah.
You can.
Good
This
point.
is such a great. It's such a great commuter car in terms, especially if you use public transportation, to be able to get to your train station and back again. And it drives me crazy that nobody markets these things like this, because it's such a great solution.
Yeah, they really should be promoting that more. And New York State. I'm not sure about Connecticut. New York is one of the states that follows the California zero emissions vehicle mandate. So manufacturers have to sell a certain percentage of EVs in New York State. I think Connecticut
does too, because it's almost all of the Northeast states.
Yeah. So,
yes.
All right. Well, as long as we're talking about electric vehicles, the reason why we're sitting here on this rooftop in Brooklyn right now,
yes, in a stunningly beautiful location,
is the New York E-Prix 2019. And for those not familiar with that, 5 years ago, they started a new racing series called Formula E, which are single-seater, open-wheel race cars. Look kind of like Indy cars, Formula One cars, except they don't burn any fuel.
Yes.
They're powered by batteries. And so this is the finale of Season 5 that's going on this weekend here in New York. And they're doing a doubleheader race. They had a race yesterday afternoon, Saturday afternoon, another race today on Sunday afternoon. There's also there's a support series that's been added this year that is sponsored by Jaguar, the Jaguar I-Pace E-Trophy Series,
yes,
which we saw running yesterday as well, and they'll be running later today. So it's all electric racing on a street circuit set up near the Brooklyn Cruise Terminal.
Right. Down at Red Hook.
Yeah, in Red Hook. And so this is the first time. I mean, I've been attending motorsports for 41 years now. I went to my first race as a kid when I was 17, or when I was 12 years old in 1978. And an interesting little detail about that. I was thinking, I saw Bobby Rahal the other night, and I started thinking about the races that I've gone to. And it turns out, over 41 years of attending various races, every single race that I have ever attended in person, Bobby Rahal has been involved in, either as a driver or a team owner. Because all the races I've been to have been either IndyCar, or that first one was a Formula Atlantic race, or IMSA races, and Rahal, Letterman, Lanigan Racing has teams in both IndyCar and IMSA. They run the BMW team in IMSA, WeatherTech Sports Car Championship. So he's been in a part of every race I've ever attended in
That's
person.
very cool.
Yeah.
Did you get a chance to tell him that?
I did.
Oh,
I did.
cool.
I
That's
stopped,
awesome.
I said hello to him and told him that little anecdote, and he smiled.
Yeah, that's great.
And said, okay, yeah, well, sure, whatever.
Yeah.
No, I mean, certainly, he's a very nice gentleman. But
and meanwhile, he's thinking, "Of course you have. I'm in everything."
but you know, of all those races, this is the first time I have ever seen electric cars racing.
Wow.
And I think it is for you too.
It absolutely is for me as well. I haven't been to nearly as many. I haven't been to nearly as many races, unfortunately, because I do love racing. I love every. You know, I love. I've been to a NASCAR race with Toyota, and thing I love about NASCAR is that, you know, if you get into a crash and it's not too bad, you can bring the car back, put matching duct tape on it, and send it back out again.
Or just grab the hammer and knock the fender out a little bit, right? So that it's not
amazing.
rubbing against the tire.
But I love the delicacy of Indy and Formula One, and you know, they all have that type of race strategy. I'm such an exhaust note girl that I was very pleasantly surprised at how engaging these vehicles are. Far more than I expected. I mean, it's sort of the new sound of car racing, and it's just you're really training your ear for different things. And so instead of having that, you know, visceral, vibrating chest sort of rumble of the engine going by.
Feeling that thunder of a Corvette C7R rumbling by, that big V8 engine, or a Cadillac DPI, or the scream of a Porsche 911.
Right, you know, and your ears vibrating, and everything sort of that overwhelming sense when the cars go by. This was more of a fine tuning kind of thing, where you could suddenly hear the gearboxes, you could hear the tires, you could hear the brakes, you could hear the crashes.
Oh yeah.
You know, I mean, that was the thing too, is that you could hear the you know, when a body part was then caught underneath the tire, you could hear that noise. So it was a different symphony. In terms of what you're hearing and listening for.
Yeah, absolutely. As you say, you know, the thing about racing, you know, is watching a race in person. You know, it's always been a very visceral experience. You know, the combination of not just seeing the cars fly by at high speed and seeing the drivers jostling for position, and that's something we also saw a lot of yesterday. A lot more of
the racing quality was incredible.
Yeah, but you know, the sound of racing, and that was probably the thing I was most concerned about, was the sound. Or the absence of it. And my friend Jonathan Gitlin, who writes for Ars Technica, you know, he's had the best description of it. You know, these things sound like TIE fighters. You know, if you've ever seen a Star Wars movie, the sound, that kind of whistling sound that the TIE fighters make, that's what these things sound like. Is they're coming at you and then they whiz by you. You know, it's a really amazing experience. And yeah, I think you didn't get here in time yesterday for the Jaguar race,
right? I did see the iPace race though.
Oh, did you?
I did.
Sorry,
I was here just in time for that, right? Yes.
All right. So you know, the iPace E-Trophy series is a new support series they added this year, and Jaguar has a fleet of modified iPaces. They're built from production body shells. They take the production body shells from the plant in Austria where they build them. They ship them to M Sport, who is Jaguar's partner. It's a British racing company. They take the stock body shells. They install an FIA approved roll cage, and then they install the stock battery, stock motors. So it's all the same. It's all production parts of the powertrain. Right. And then the suspension is basically the same, except they take out the rubber bushings and replace them with metal solid metal bushings. So there's a little less compliance, you know, improve the handling for a race car. And then the other thing they add is they replace the brakes with AP Racing brakes. Sure. But you know, aside from that, they look very stock, and you know, they're quite quick, even though they weigh 4,500 pounds. I mean, they weigh about more than twice as much as the Formula E cars, but they're still fairly quick. I was talking to Mark Hacking, who was driving one of the cars, and he said, yeah, max speed that they hit on a lap is about 110 miles an hour, and they run 25-minute races. The one thing from a spectator standpoint, the one thing missing from the Jaguars is the sound that the Formula E cars make, because they are using the stock powertrain. You know, the Formula E cars, most of that sound apparently is coming from the gearbox, the whine of the gearbox. Right. The Jaguars don't have that, because the gearbox, you know, they're using a production gearbox, which is obviously a lot quieter, you know, so what you hear with the Jaguars primarily is you hear the tires squealing as they go around the corners, because they're using production, like street tires. They're using Michelin Pilot Super Sport tires on there, and then the brakes. So you hear what you'll hear is the grinding of the metallic brake pads on these racing brakes as they come into a corner. You hear the tires squealing as they go through the corner, and then nothing until the next corner, and you hear that cycle repeated. And I had a chance to sit down at a round table a couple of days ago with Brian Sellers and Simon Evans, a couple of the drivers in the series. Simon drives for Bobby Rahall's team, Brian drives for Bobby Rahall's team, and Simon drives for the New Zealand team. And one of the things that Brian mentioned, said that the one complaint he has about the cars is that the brakes are too good.
How funny.
Yeah, because and that's not something you often hear from a race driver.
Right.
The reason why that can be a problem is in racing, especially on a tight street circuit like this. Very tight corners. There's not a lot of room to pass. One of the places where you have passing opportunities in motorsports is under braking. If somebody's willing to go in a little bit deeper before they hit the brakes, you can sometimes get past somebody going into a corner, and typically, the race drivers, in most cases, they'll start getting on the brakes maybe 200 yards out, 220 yards out from the apex of the corner, the center of the corner. And Brian said that in these cars, they're going to about 50 to 70 yards out, which is not a lot of room. Right. And they're basically going from the accelerator, hammering on the brakes, and the cycle is basically all on the brakes, off the brakes, turn, and then the electric motors have so much torque, and then it's hard, all the way on the accelerator and accelerate onto the next turn, rinse and repeat. So that's why you hear that cycle of the sound of the brakes, the tires, and then the acceleration is silent. And so it's an interesting different kind of sound, or lack of sound in some cases, from these cars. And talking to Jack Lambert, the lead development engineer, they're looking at some updates to the cars for next year. One of the things they're looking at is maybe dialing back the brakes a little bit. They've heard from the drivers, to make a little more competitive racing. And then they may also look at things like maybe adding some sound somewhere to the cars to add to the spectator part of it.
Right.
But the racing was great.
The racing was great, and that's one of the things. So I'm hosted by Audi this week here, and they provided Alan McNish to us, who's a very, very experienced 3-time Le Mans winner. He now runs the Audi Sport ABT Schaeffler team, and what's fascinating about talking to somebody like Alan is that he just has this wide range of experience. And he said yesterday that this is a league in its infancy, and so they're able to start tweaking those and changing things, and as they learn, this isn't something that's been established for 30 or 40 years. So they have this really great opportunity to be able to say what's working, what's not working. Let's talk about this. Everyone wants this series to succeed, and so it's a very collaborative environment from that standpoint, and really understanding what appeals to the audience, what appeals to the drivers, what makes these races better. And the racing part of it was just it was absolutely top caliber. I mean, it was really, really cool. There was such excitement, and the track that they did here was fantastic. It has this great hairpin turn
as street circuits go. It's a good.
Well, I like the fact that they shove it into Brooklyn.
Yeah.
and so it is a very, very compact track, and so but the hairpin turn that they had right at the spectator location to be able to see, that was actually a great opportunity for passing as well and crashing as we saw.
We saw a lot of both of those.
So, but it's just, again, I was just very, very impressed with the level of experience, the level of people they have. These are some of their best people in the racing industry that are involved in something like this, and the quality of racing was absolutely top notch.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned this year, season 5 of Formula E, they launched a new Generation 2 car. One of the interesting details about the first generation cars that they ran for the first 4 years is at that time, the battery technology was still not where it needed to be in terms of range and capacity. And so what they ended up doing, they're 45-minute races, and the first generation cars had a 30 kilowatt hour battery pack, lithium ion battery pack. And because they couldn't figure out a way to safely do a quick change of the battery or fast charge the battery, what they ended up doing is they actually had 2 cars for every driver.
Oh, wow.
And so at about 23 minutes into the race, the drivers would actually come in, pit, hop out of the car, and hop into a second identical car that was fully charged, and then continue the race and finish off the race.
It's crazy.
Which is kind of crazy. This year, the Generation 2 cars have a larger 60 kilowatt hour battery pack. So they're able to go the full race distance on a single charge. 45-minute. The races are 45 minutes plus one lap after that. So once you hit the 45-minute timer, they do one more complete lap, and then that's it. I think you heard some interesting things from Alan about the race strategy.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit more about that.
So I asked him, how does this differ from a traditional gas-powered or even hybrid-powered engine? And he said, it really doesn't. Racing's about efficiency. Racing is about maximizing the efficiency of that engine to minimize pit time and originally to try and not use a lot of fuel, but this is about getting to that end, because as we saw at the very end, we're looking at they were left like 4% battery. These were
some were down to like 1 and 2%.
1-2%. These were really, really low. You are talking low single digits that you're left with.
And one of the interesting things from a spectator standpoint is on the big screens that are all around the track, which in a street course you need that because you can only see a relatively small portion of the track. But they were cycling through, so they show you the action on other parts of the track. They also show you the standings. Where are the drivers? What's the sequence of the drivers? And they would cycle through, and they would show you they would show you the gap between each place. Second place half a second behind the leader, and so on. But then it would cycle through, and you would see how much battery was left,
right?
Which is something you don't ever see with these other cars. You don't see how much fuel they have left in the tank.
Right.
They were showing us live. Okay, they're at 15% left. They're at 14, 13. The last couple of laps, they were down to like 3, 4%, 2%.
It's crazy.
And on that last lap, some of them were down to 1%.
Yeah. So that's the thing is that it adds. It's the excitement is there, the emotion is there. It's just different. You're getting different information, but it was really cool. So he said, Alan said basically that a lot of the strategy is very much the same. It's still a race, and I think that he was very pleasantly surprised at how exciting that race was yesterday as well. And Nissan won, we should make that point. So congratulations to them. But it was just fantastic to see. BMW is here. So it's BMW, Jag, Nissan, Audi. Mercedes has a stand.
Yeah, Mercedes is joining the series next season. As is Porsche. Porsche is also joining the series.
Oh, right, because the Taycan was here.
Yes.
We got a chance to see that.
Yeah, they did some demo laps around the track with the Porsche Taycan.
Taycan, sorry. Yes.
Prototype. Right now it's Jaguar, BMW, Audi, Nissan, Venturi, and DS, which is a division of PSA, Peugeot Citroën. So they are the factory teams, and then there's also some customer teams as well that are using motors. And another thing that has changed over the years, originally the first year or two of Formula E, they had not only a spec chassis, so everybody was running the same car, but they also had the same motors and batteries and everything. Over time, they have changed and allowed manufacturers to come in and design their own powertrain. So they still use a stock chassis and battery. Everybody uses the same battery. But the manufacturers design their own motors, their own power electronics, and their own gearboxes,
and their own regenerating.
And the regenerative brake system, which is part of that drivetrain.
Right.
And so they have some various approaches to it. One of the things that's unique about Nissan, at least for this year, is that they actually, rather than using a single motor and a differential in the rear axle, they actually have a 2-motor setup, so they can do a little bit of torque vectoring, which. They have changed the rules for next year. They're banning that because there's concern that that's going to lead into things like traction control, which they don't want. They want the drivers to stay involved. So next year Nissan will be switching to a single motor setup, but for now it's still a 2-motor. And they're limited during race conditions. normally to 200 kilowatts, which is about 300 or about 280 horsepower roughly. And during qualifying, they get to run 250 kilowatts.
Okay.
So they get a little more power during qualifying,
Right.
a little bit less, so that they're trying to balance it, so that you have enough, for good speed. And these cars are running fast. I mean, they're getting 130, 140 miles an hour
Right.
at some parts of the track. So they're not slow at all. They're fairly lightweight. They weigh about 900
And
kilos,
the
so about
torque
2,000 pounds.
is unbelievable.
Yeah.
I mean,
the acceleration.
Oh my god!
You see these guys come out of a corner, and you see the speed, and you hear that gearbox whine, that TIE Fighter sound as it spools up as they're accelerating, and then they get on the brakes and it winds down again.
It was incredible to see it in action. And again, that's the thing, is that there's so much appeal to this racing that I really honestly wasn't expecting as much. And it's great because you can actually carry on a conversation. You can talk to each other and say, "Wow, did you see that? That was amazing," without needing earplugs and all that kind of stuff.
It's the first time in a long time I've been to a race without earplugs.
Right. I mean, it was really and there's not a lot of flammable materials around. It was it's just a very, very different atmosphere, but really, really good. Really good.
Yeah. Another thing that I think also contributes to the good racing is the aerodynamic limitations. One of the issues with Formula One cars, they have these crazy aerodynamics, big wings and everything, and because of that, it creates a lot of turbulence behind the cars, and it makes it very hard for the cars to follow closely behind each other. They rely heavily on downforce for high cornering speeds. Here, on the types of circuits that run Formula E on, these tight street circuits, the downforce isn't as important, and the cars themselves, they're very limited in the aerodynamics. They have a big diffuser underneath that generates some downforce at the back, but the wings, you don't have these big massive wings like you do on an F1 car or an Indy car.
Right.
And so because of that, the cars are able to run much tighter together, much closer together. So because they all have the same amount of power and relatively low downforce configuration, they're able to run very close together, and that contributes to that tight racing. And they can fight for position all the time, which is makes it really exciting for the spectators, and I think probably makes it exciting for the drivers as well.
Exactly.
Because they actually get to battle each other. These people are very competitive, which that's what they want. They want to be able to get in close.
Well, I think that's another aspect of it. You're absolutely right, Sam. Is that the skills of the drivers is at the highest level here, and it's, I mean, the racing part of it is still so competitive that it's I get there may be people, purists, that say this isn't racing. It is. This is 100% racing, and it's just the new sound of it. And it's really, really cool.
Absolutely, and I think ACO, the organization that organizes Le Mans and the World Endurance Championship, they are launching a new top class next year, their hypercar class, which is still going to include hybrid powertrains. But for the next generation, they've already said for the next generation, in the 2024 or 25 timeframe, they want to go to electric vehicles. They want to go to zero emission vehicles, which could be battery electric or it could be fuel cell.
Right.
And having watched this race now, and seeing the evolution over the last few years of Formula E, going from having to run half the race, swap to another car, to now running a full 45 minutes at very high speeds, and be very competitive. I can see, and now we're starting to get technologies that are coming to market, like the Taycan, that's going to have 350 kilowatt charging capability. I can see the potential for 5 years down the road, getting to a point where we have Le Mans prototypes, cars running 24 hours Le Mans that are maybe charging it to 800 kilowatts, or even doing a battery swap setup. That's a technology that has evolved. Something like that, so you can come in, have a quick pit stop, do a driver change tires, get the car topped back up again, and have it back on the track and running, for 24 hours, in a reasonable fashion. that is now a realistic proposition, I think, and I think a very exciting proposition.
It is. And one of the things to keep in mind too is that, people say, why race? Why be involved in this? This is their lab. This is their experimental lab. This is where they get the opportunity to develop technology and features and things like battery swapping that will then come to market. They will be available then in vehicles. And this is their space program. These are opportunities for manufacturers to invest in technology that they need to try out, and then they will eventually transfer some of this over to that mainstream buyer and make these vehicles, incredibly environmentally friendly vehicles, more accessible to the general public. And so it's, this is a little bit of what Alan was talking about yesterday, just in terms of saying, this is where we get to try stuff out.
Yeah. And, you mentioned earlier, that efficiency is such an important part of racing, especially endurance racing. Most people think of racing as just driving fast.
Right.
But, there's a classic line about racing, to finish first you must finish. And so that means it's got to be reliable. But also, especially in longer distance racing, the time that you spend in the pits, if you, like say for example at Le Mans, I'll go back to something I heard several years back from the Corvette racing team. When they first started running the Corvettes at Le Mans in 1999, those first couple of years, they were running about 10 laps between pit stops. 10 lap stints between pit stops. I mean, it's a long track. It's an 8.5-mile track.
Right, yeah.
But they were getting 10 laps per stint, and then they had to come in and refuel.
Right.
By 2010, they were going 14 laps.
Yeah.
They had improved their efficiency by 40%.
It's amazing.
And that makes a huge difference. I mean, if you're in the pits for a minute and a half, getting fuel, getting tires, that makes an enormous difference.
Right.
Added up over the course of a 24-hour race, or even a 4-hour race or a 2-hour race. The time you spend in the pits is time you're not on the track racing. And so efficiency is really as important in racing as it is as pure speed. But if you can take that, if you can figure out how to make the car more efficient so you can run longer without refueling it or recharging it, that also has a huge benefit to consumers, especially with electric vehicles. So if you can figure out how to do that in an electric race car, get that efficiency out of the electric race car, in the case of these cars, because they have to run 45 minutes and, they're trying to get their, use as much of that charge as they can. Because if they have to, if they're running low on charge at, in the last few laps of the race and they have to back off, they're not going to win.
Right.
So you want to maximize how far you can go on that amount of charge, that amount of energy you have. And if you can take that and then translate that to production cars, now you can have a production car that has a longer range, or you can have a car that has a 200-mile range, but instead of a 60 kilowatt-hour battery, you can reduce it to a 50 or 40 kilowatt-hour battery. That dramatically reduces your cost because that battery is the most expensive piece of that car.
Easily.
And so there's huge potential for consumer benefits as well as for better competition.
Right. So they're really learning. They're learning a lot from a spectator standpoint, from making these races even more engaging, that from a driver standpoint. I mean, everyone is still learning in this. And at the end of the day, the consumer is really going to benefit from all of these learnings and from all of this experience. And that's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, with that, I'd say let's call this one a show. And thank you, Rebecca, for joining me up here on the roof this morning.
Thank you for having me. It's amazing.
Yeah, beautiful day. And time to pack up and go hit the track and watch some more electric cars racing around.
Exactly.
All right.
Let's go.
Thanks, everybody, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Hey everybody, it's Sam. Hope you enjoyed that. And now stay tuned for Alan McNish talking about the strategy for driving a Formula E car.
Boosting and acceleration, how we use it is basically flat out, and how you recover energy in the braking and the coasting phases. And
where are they lifting? Like, so coming to this point, like, where would you lift at that point to post into it?
It depends on where we are in the race and things, but kind of not far away from where we are, not here. So you've got this situation a bit. Who's driven the e-tron?
I have.
Right. With the e-tron, you know that when you brake, you recuperate energy into the battery.
Yes, yes.
When you lift off the gas, or lift off the electric. Thank you.
No, accelerator. That's strange.
He gets paid the big bucks.
So when you lift off, then you also recuperate, and also you can do it manually, which is the driver. So we've got a system which gives an element of automation to that. However, the driver has to follow it. So it kind of understands what it needs to do, and it's predicting where it needs to go, but the driver's got to follow, and if the driver doesn't follow, then it doesn't work.
How quickly does the system switch from output to input?
Well, no, it's always guidance. It's not automated in that respect, it's guidance. And so therefore we've got this situation where the driver has got to really be careful. And so if he gets into a wheel-to-wheel fight, like a dog fight, if you think back to Sebring, that is negative. Because when you are blocking someone, say into the hairpin, you go to the inside, someone goes to your outside, and you keep the position. But by doing that, when you come out, you need more energy to accelerate out the corner. So therefore you actually penalise yourself, not at that instant, but 5, 6, 7 laps down the line. And so this is where it becomes quite a complex situation. So we're given a bit of information there. The car obviously does its bit, but at the same time, every time when you put energy back in, you're also increasing the battery temperature. And for all of the manufacturers, for all of the teams, we've all got the same battery. And it has got its threshold. And so therefore that is an area where we're trying to control through our software how we put the energy back in. And to make sure that it's at the smoothest rate possible, but also at the one where we get the least compromise in the last lap of the race.
So can you adjust on the fly if you get into situations where you're using more?
The drivers have to adjust on the fly.
They have to.
Oh yeah.
So is there, and this is remedial, and I apologize, but is the recuperation system different? So the battery's the same, but how you're recouping?
Yes. Right. Just to go back, the chassis is the same for all.
Okay.
The brakes are the same for all.
Okay.
The battery is the same for all.
Okay.
Where our IP is in the electric motor,
Right.
the inverter,
Right.
and the gearbox, and then the software.
Okay.
And this is the point.
So
is
those can be proprietary.
Those are the areas where we put a lot of investment in.
Right.
So during the season, you cannot adjust any of the hardware. So the physical hardware, that's sealed in, that's it.
Wow.
And you get 2 sets for the whole year.
Wow.
And if you need a third set, you get a huge penalty.
Wow.
So therefore you need 2 sets.
Right.
And then through the season, what we do is we develop the software.
Okay.
And that is a learning that's just constantly ongoing. And it's done in the simulator back in Neuburg.
Right, sure.
And then it's transferred onto the test track, and then it gets onto the race cars.
And you're tweaking that algorithm constantly and the learnings from there.
So is this like F1 where you only have so many test days, or can you test as often as you want?
We've got a total of 15 test days, and then as Audi, because we supply Virgin, who are a customer team of ours, then because of that, then we're allowed an extra 7 days. So in total, we've got 22. That's it.
So how helpful is it having Virgin as a customer team, and how much feedback do you get? Like, they run the same. I assume they run the same software as you that you can. So are they helpful? Are they working as like a one team?
It's not one team, no, it's 2 teams. We've got to beat them. It's my job to beat them. It's their job to beat me.
Right. But do you get good tech feedback from them?
Being very frank about it, when we started the discussion with them, I looked at it this way, that it's better to have 4 Audis on the grid than 2. They're one of the top teams, without question, and if one of the top teams prefers to come away from being a manufacturer association to a customer of us, it's an absolute feather in the cap. At the same time, it means that we do have internal competition, which is natural, just in the same way as Lucas and Daniel have that. However, it's positive. And this is the key point, is that internal competition, as you know, can be destructive or it can be positive. For us, it was set out right at the beginning, boundary lines. We are racing each other. We are not going to move over and say, after you, and vice versa, they're not going to either. However, from an overall development perspective, then more information is better. Simple fact. And so I think at the moment it's been a very successful, and it's what I said in the press conference yesterday. You know, we're here to win the championship. However, in a very positive way for Audi, we've got second and third in the championship because they are sitting in third. So I'm actually looking at making sure we win the championship, but I've also got a bit of an eye on these guys.
It's not looking like an Audi or even a Cheeto place.
No.
Is that must be helpful for the championship if Jeb and Andre aren't up front?
No, it's status quo for the team's championship because Jeb's ahead of.
Oh, is it catchable?
Yeah, it's catchable. We're in a better position than they are because Daniel is ahead of Jeb, who's ahead of Lucas, who's ahead of Andre. So they're second and fourth, and we're first and third. But I think really it's status quo, if I'm being very frank. In the Drivers' Championship, then, you know, our fight is with Jeb, 100%. And so they're 2-3.
But now you're a manufacturer now, you're not supposed to care about Drivers' Championships, it's all about the team.
It's about both. We set out a goal.
That's a good answer.
We set out a goal at the beginning of the season, and that was to be competitive, to win races, and to be competitive, to be in the fight at the last race here in New York for both drivers and teams championship, and then obviously you go for the win. And the reason we set that out, because it sounds easy, was last year we arrived here and we were not in contention for the drivers. We were out of it before we got here. And so therefore we've actually done part of our job. Now we've got the big part to do, which is both the drivers and teams.
Right.
But so far we're in the fight for both. And strategically, and I go to the strategy meeting in an hour and 15 minutes, I know that both car crews will be thinking of themselves. I've got to think of Audi, but also I've got to be careful that I don't gain for one driver and penalise the other, because Daniel is only 12 points off third in the championship. So we're looking, Lucas can win, Daniel can still be right there in the championship, so it's a bit of a juggling act with your kids, I suppose, when it's Christmas and you're trying to get the prezzies divvied out.
It's a Venus and Serena sort of thing, where you're playing, where your siblings.
I would classify Daniel and Lucas as Venus and Serena, to be honest.
I'm trying to keep it gender neutral. We're in Brooklyn.
It's good though. Just want to be second. Say about them. This is one fortunate thing from my point of view, because you mentioned Dindo and Tom earlier on. With teammates, it can either gel or it can be a war.
Right.
And especially when it gets down to a competitive situation, it's very easy for it to be fractious and a bit of a war. With these two, they're kind of like a married couple, and they do work well. And yes, there's a little bit of an abrasion every now and then. Last year on Saturday into turn 6, I remember. But it all worked out, and so that's a big positive, I think, for us as a team. Is that we've got two guys that are very, very competitive, but they also understand the bigger picture, and they can work well to try and develop everything forward together.
So when you were talking about that strategy, how much carryover and carry across can you do from when you're driving a more traditional vehicle versus electric? And sort of conservation and using,
Principles are the same. If I go back to when we were racing in the American Le Mans series, Laguna Seca 2007.
My favorite track.
Love it. Absolutely. World Superbikes are there this weekend.
All-time favorite.
A friend of mine was standing at the corkscrew.
Love that. Aim for the tree.
But which one?
The
that
big
was
one.
The thing, because Dario didn't tell me which one. He told me aim for the tree. I get there and it was like 5. A roller coaster. But in that race, we had to make about an hour and 20 minutes on a tank of gas.
Wow.
And we'd never ever tried that, never done anything. It was the only way to win the race, and it was sort of learning as you go along what we could do to achieve it, and we did achieve it. And that's exactly the same philosophy as now.
Right.
You don't have enough to go flat out, so you've got to try to work out how you do it. So the principles are the same. The principles of the way you develop are the same. It just happens to be the technology is different.
Right.
And so I think in that respect, we're in a very good situation here at the circuit and also back at home.
Right.
To the point that the majority of the people that are in design and development of the e-tron FE05 were in our Le Mans program in our R18, our R15, our R10, our R8, and right back when they were in touring car for some of them. And so Stefan Dreyer is an example, who was a junior when the R8 started in ALMS in 2000, is head of our drivetrain program, which covers DTM, internal combustion engine, and it covers the electric engine here.
Brilliant.
So again, principles are the same. It's just what you're actually doing and the way you're doing it.
Is the approach like the old John Wyer, like win as slowly as you can? Like, just this is...
I never went for that. I always went win as hard as you can, drill them into the ground.
So, Alan, how many people are involved with the program in Germany?
We cover across between Formula E and DTM. So you take Stefan as a good example. Then he covers off both our Axel Löffler, who did the chassis in our LMPs and DTM. Then they cover off both. So it's not dedicated to only one or the other. There's a lot of cross party. Even here at the circuit, some of them jump between DTM and back.
Now that the series is picking up, how does it feel compared to other moments in racing that you've had? Do you feel like the sport is evolving to the point where it feels like a true sport? Are you all the way in, and what stands out to you?
The way I'd say it is, the sport's a little bit like a child. It's just a kindergarten. It's 5 years old. So if you know a child at 5 years old, you've got to let it make its mistakes, do its thing, find out what it likes, what it doesn't like, but you've also got to maybe guide it on occasions. And that's where we are. So, you know, we've gone to the party and everybody's all excited and there's plenty of cake and everything else, and we just got to try to make sure that we control the growth and development of the championship. In terms of what I like about it, I have to say, it's got a youthful enthusiasm. You know, they've came here as a promoter and as a championship, and they've said, right, okay, we're going to have a battery electric vehicle championship. No one's done it before. So therefore, do we have to follow the historic ways of doing things? No, we don't. And then looked at it with a completely open eyes. And I would say this championship is designed for now, without necessarily thinking, well, we did this 10 years ago and that didn't work, and this sort of thing. So they've got a very open-minded attitude. That, I say, has got some trials and tribulations, but it has been one of the breaths of fresh air that I personally have found about it. You know, when I say trials and tribulations, qualifying, the way they set out the qualifying groups means that if you're in the front of the championship, you're in the first group. The first group is always a difficult group because the circuit conditions are bad. So it's slow. So you qualify mid to the back of the grid. And you think, well, but I'm better than that, I should be at the front. But you qualify there. And what that does is it creates a situation coming into the last race, 8 drivers can fight for the title. So it is a breath of fresh air, and I love it as a fan. As a team principal, I've got to be honest with you, that one I think. But you've got to take the bigger view. And with that, I think that's in a very good position when I said about growing the championship. All of the manufacturers sit down and we have common discussions, common views in, I would say, 90% of the way we think the championship should go and how it should evolve. And we're working with the promoter and the organising body how to do that.
What problems do you want to solve outside of motorsports?
Well, in terms of that, we come to some fantastic cities. We're going to new markets. So for next year, we're going to South Korea to Seoul, just as a perfect example. I think we've got to always go to areas that are relevant to us, and that's I would say a very big factor. New York's huge. US is the second biggest market for Audi. It's a very important market, I think, for the electric vehicle and the transitions for that. And so we've got to make sure that we are relevant there. We've got to make sure we're relevant in the technology we can develop in the series, and that can then be translated onto the road car, because that's one of the reasons, not the only, but one of the reasons why we are racing here. In terms of the bigger picture, I would say we've got to be aware that our sport is changing. The world is changing. And we're not immune to that. We can't just be the same as we were before. We've got to realise that now people's attentions are on different things. It's now you've got to be much more considerate to where you go and where you race and how you race, to the point that it takes, about 18 days, I think, to build this up and take it out. And in future, the championship is looking how to reduce that, because that's for the local environment, how you put something into the local environment as well. So there's some bigger picture apart from just the racing around about the circuit. We're all invested into that because I think we have to be invested into it because of the way that motorsport has to be a trendsetter, but also to follow the ways that we're going in the world.
Are there any other comparisons to other moments in motorsport that this reminds you of, or is this like really out of the box?
Totally out of the box, honestly. It's totally out of the box. And it just, the only other thing I would say is when we went with the hybrid to Le Mans for the first time, they explained the whole car concept to me, and I've got this flywheel spinning at 30,000 revs about a few inches.
Worry you?
Sorry?
I suppose you have to just trust the engineers, right?
But no, I didn't, because I knew the safety things that went into it. But this whole concept about storing lost energy and then using it again, I loved it. But was it actually going to work? And was it going to be a benefit? And then the first time you drive it, you realise the benefit. But it was that out-of-the-box thinking. And this is where I think it is exciting for us now, because there's a huge rate of change. My racing career started in 1981. 1991, 2001, it was all still gasoline engine car. 2006 was the first time we ever raced with anything that wasn't gasoline. First international race that was won by anything apart from a gasoline engine car was Sebring 2006. Then within 12 years from that date, we had gone from using something other than gasoline to hybrid to full battery electric vehicle. It's just like a massive swing from what you've had for 80, 90 years beforehand. Not to say that that's all gone, but it's just that change is so quick, and that's exciting. Because what's it going to be in another 15 years' time? What can you think about happening? If you look at the Geneva show and CES and everything else, it's all combining. It's not just the car industry, everything's all combining. There's huge changes, and I like that. I really do like that.
So going back to the environment, it's very interesting that you have fan boost and you have really great fan interactions here. How do you see that expanding? Is there any more room for expansion around that?
It's a good point. Fan boost is something that I find odd in a way, because your performance can be assisted or assisting someone else, your competition, by people that you've never met around the world. But the very good thing about fan boost as well is that it tells everybody the race is on. And so even on the Audi MyNet service, because of this man, it's up there on the front page when it's got the daily news of everything that's going on. It's saying, by the way, vote for Lucas, vote for Daniel. We're racing in New York this weekend. It's a championship decider. Come on. And the whole company then gets a little bit behind it. So how it expands on a sporting point, I think we've got to be careful not to have too much.
It seems to have more of an impact on the race than fan boost ever has.
Sorry?
Fan boost never seems to have affected races. It gets fans.
It has affected races. Yep.